our first agenda, the opening speech by the Vice Rector for Partnership, Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Business, Professor Dr. Eng Adi Maulana, STMPL. Time is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ido, as a moderator. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our honorable speakers today, Professor Paul, I should call you professor because you have spent your time for 50 years just to study about the legacy of Wallace. Other participants, we have here some not only from forestry department but also a kind of a mixed background here. We also have from archaeology, I don't know, maybe from anthropology, we have marine science even, and we have Ibu Hera here as a head of language center. Yes, yeah. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for International Office, Ibu Cita and Pak Rido, to manage this event. And then yesterday I met with Pak Rector, and then we had a very short discussion on Paul visit. Thank you very much, Paul, for visiting our university. I know that you are very familiar with Makassar, especially with Hasanuddin University, and then we always happy to accept you in our university. And again, thank you very much for supporting Hasanuddin University, and we are hoping that our future collaboration will be more expansive and then will be more strengthened. Dear participant, I'm a geologist, so I'm very familiar with Wallace. Why? Because in geology we know about the Wallace line. I think in forestry as well, in biology, Wallace line is a kind of like a line to divide Indonesia into two portions. And then the Wallace line is trending from the North Makassar Strait into the south of Makassar Strait. In the western part of the Wallace line, we call it ASEAN influenced ecosystem, or especially animals. And then in the eastern part, we call it the Australia ASEAN influenced animals. And then Wallace line, we also use Wallace line in order to describe about the tectonic setting of Indonesian archipelago. I know that in biology and in forestry, you also use what's so-called Wallace line here. When I was still in Australia, I finished my master in Australian National University. I read books about bee or HMS Beagle. It's about the journey of Charles Darwin. You know, Charles Darwin is one of the greatest scientists in the world. I know the story behind the evolution theory. Yeah, I know. Actually, Wallace wrote a letter to Charles Darwin, and then Charles Darwin grabs some idea from Wallace, and then Charles Darwin published the paper. I think that's one of the inspirations if you have known about the terminology publish or perish. So that's why you really need to publish first. Otherwise, you will perish. So I think that kind of story illustrates the Wallace, because I know that actually Wallace has a very good idea in explaining, because he worked, I don't know, maybe many years. We will see. I mean, we will heard from Paul about the story of Wallace, how he spent his time in Malaya archipelago, even in South Sulawesi, especially in Maros, in Ternate, and many places, especially in Borneo, in Indonesia. Paul will deliver us some knowledge, because he has, I think, he spent 50 years of his life just to study, or to deal with some Wallace line. And then we had a very short discussions just now that we are we are going to make sort of like a research consortium, and then we want to use Wallace legacy to face the future challenge, especially climate change, food security, and other problem that we are facing now. Once again, Paul, on behalf of Rector of Hasanuddin University, we would like to say thank you very much again. We know that, just want to let you know, next year we have a big plan. We want to celebrate centennial or 100 years of 200 years 200 years of Alfred Wallace by making an international conference to celebrate 200 years of Alfred Wallace in Makassar. So we are going to be a host, and then of course Paul will help us to manage and then to design the event. And then for the participant, I do hope that you will get many knowledge from Paul presentations. And in that, Dr. Rido as moderator asked me to formally open this discussion or this seminar. I, on behalf of Rector of Hasanuddin University, would like to formally open this webinar or seminar. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have a very nice discussion.
Thank you very much for the Vice Rector for yeah. Let's move on to the next agenda, but beforehand, let me remind you kindly to everyone that Mr. Paul requests that no handphone usage during during his presentation. Okay, jadi mohon HP-nya dinonaktifkan selama presentasi beliau, otherwise dia akan stop bicara dan membolehkan Anda untuk buka. So please tolong jangan diaktifkan HP-nya selama presentasi beliau. Okay, next, for those of you who are new with this building, untuk bagi yang baru dengan bangunan ini, on the right side we have like woman restroom, and this one is the a man restroom. Our assemble point is outside of the auditorium. Okay, so this is for information for those of you who are a short of biography from Mr. Paul Spencer. I'm sorry with this. Okay, he lives in Geneva, Switzerland. His nationality is a French American. I know that some participants from French department. Okay, he is a frequent visitor to Makassar and has traveled throughout Indonesia, including seldom visited small island. He used to live in Sarawak, Singapore, and Indonesia for 13 years. He was a keynote speaker at the UNHAS Alfred Wallace conference a few times ago. And he works for the WWF International as a director for international campaign. He was the author of more than 600 articles, amazing, and 19 books, most of which deal with the environment, culture, and development in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. He followed Alfred Russel Wallace in the Malay archipelago for more than 50 years. The result is his award-winning book, An Inordinate Fondness of Beatles. He was also a guest presenter at Makassar Writer Conference, and last but not least, he has given creative writing workshop for UNHAS faculty members. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Spencer Sosowski.
Thank you, Pat. Good morning. Selamat pagi, bonjour. Thank you so much for inviting me today, and thank you for the very generous introduction I'd like to speak to you about Alfred Russel Wallace, who, even though he's been dead for a long time, he's one of my best friends. He's also one of my mentors. And look at what he did and what he accomplished, not to only look at the history, but to look forward. What did he learn that we can use today for conservation? There's two parts to this presentation. The first is what I call the hero's journey, and the second is the relationship between Wallace and Darwin, as you've just heard about, and it's a very interesting story. How many of you are familiar with this book, The Malay Archipelago? I know some of you are. If you're not, I strongly recommend you have a look at this book. It's available in Bahasa. You can get it at Gramedia. And this is one of the most important travel books ever written about Asia. And we'll see why in a little while. Now, what does this mean, the hero's journey? When we think of a hero, what do we think of? Do we think of Aung San Suu Kyi? Do we think of Mahatma Gandhi? Do we think of Luke Skywalker? Do we think of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz? All these people are on heroes' journeys, and here's my point, is that you are also on a hero's journey. A hero is on a quest, and a quest doesn't have to be to climb Mount Everest. A quest can be, I want to get a master's degree. A quest can be, I want to save a little portion of coral reef. That's also a hero's journey. Think about yourselves as heroes. You're on a quest, you want to achieve something. Now, Wallace, like all heroes, left home early, and he had problems. Any kind of journey is never easy. There's always something that's going wrong. There's an illness, there's an accident, there's no money, there's a revolution, there's something that's happening to you. Somebody says no, and you say yes. One of the most interesting points for me about Wallace is that he left school at the age of 13. Nevertheless, he wrote 24 books. He wrote 500 scientific papers. So you, with your much higher education, should be able to do more than that. He was a very, what we call a Renaissance man. He was interested in many different things: conservation, natural history, but also anthropology. And he was interested in things that we may think of as modern ideas. He was interested in women's liberation, food and drug controls, stopping gambling. So he was a very he was a big thinker. He was always looking for new ideas, and he had big opinions. One thing I like about Wallace was that he was not afraid to show emotion. Now, if you think about Victorian England in the 1850s, people were very tight. They didn't express emotion. But Wallace, yes. He didn't express emotion about people, he expressed emotion about kupu-kupu. And he caught this butterfly in Aru, and he said, I trembled with excitement when I caught this butterfly. I had a headache all day, how excited I was. I like that about Wallace. In the 1850s, England and the UK was a very dirty place because of the Industrial Revolution. And Wallace was angry. He said, every person in Britain deserves pure air and pure water. Now think about that. That's a very modern thing to talk about. And who did he blame? Again, it's very modern. He blamed politicians, businessmen. So I think Wallace today would fit in with the conservation mentality that we have. I like the bottom quote particularly, that all living things are not meant for man. Does man have dominion over all nature? Do we have the right to destroy nature, or does nature have a right to exist because it's right to do so? We can talk about that. I'd like your opinion about that. All around the world, teenagers mostly want to explore. You want to leave home. You want to take chances, don't you? You want to say, thank you, Mom and Dad, but I need some freedom. Now, let me tell you a story about Wallace, how this took place in his life. He was living in England. He had a friend named Henry Walter Bates, and they were 24 years old. Neither of them had been to university. They were collecting beetles in the English countryside, and they said to each other, let's go to the Amazon. Now think about this, 1850, before steam, this is 1840s, before steam engines. They had no money, they had no education, they had no government support, they had no academic support, they had no diplomatic support. They didn't speak Portuguese, they didn't know anybody in Brazil. For me, that's craziness, but it's wonderful craziness. Sometimes you have to take a chance, and Wallace spent 4 years in the Amazon and Rio Negro River. Wallace was coming back from the Amazon after 4 years with most of his collection on a small boat. One morning, in the middle of the Atlantic, the captain knocks on the door saying, "Excuse me, sir, we have a bit of a problem. The boat seems to be on fire." So Wallace and 10 other men got into a lifeboat, spent 10 days almost dying on the Atlantic. He watched the ship burn and all of his specimens disappear. And he said, "I'll never go on another boat as long as I live." Do you remember what you had for lunch last week? No. Talk about memory. Wallace lost his specimens and he lost his notebooks. He managed to save 2 notebooks, but he still had a memory. And his memory meant that he could write 2 big books about Amazon, Travels on the Rio Negro and The Palms of the Amazon. One's a travel book, one's a scientific book. For me, that's pretty exceptional, that his memory was so good that he was able to write these kind of books. He said he would never get on another boat, but he did. He got a steamer from UK to Singapore. And he wrote that he had two objectives in making this trip. He wanted to study and he wanted to collect orangutans and cendrawasih. I say collect. Wallace had no money again. He had to survive by collecting specimens and selling them to his beetle agent in London, who would sell them to museums and private collectors. And they liked cendrawasih, they liked orangutans, they liked butterflies, they liked beetles. Look at this. He traveled 22,000 kilometers in 1850s Indonesia. It's hard to imagine what Indonesia looked like in those days. You know, now you want to go any pula-pula kecil, it's gampang, it's easy. You want to call up somebody across the country, no problem. He made 96 collecting expeditions, and just to remind you again, he traveled unofficially, no government support, no financial support, no academic support. He had to go to the local Dutch authority and say, can you help me? Which they usually did. Or he had to go to some kapala kampong way out in the middle of the forest and say, Pa, you know, excuse me, I'd like to build a little structure and live in your forest for 3 weeks. And can you give me some men to help me? He spoke some Malay. I don't think he spoke a lot of Malay, but he was able to get by. I'm going to ask you to turn off your phone, please. This is what he collected. A 125,000 specimens. Think about that. Beetles, ants, insects, birds, butterflies, monkeys. I find that remarkable. The most interesting point here is he found 200 new species of ants. Now, okay, what I want you to do at lunchtime, you go into the park here and you look for ants. See how many ants you can find. Maybe you find a black one, maybe you find a red one, maybe you find a big one. Congratulations. Are any of them new species? Probably not. How does one man without an education, without a taxonomy background, without reference books, with a little magnifying glass, how is he able to say, this one is new, and this one is different to this one is also new? And then, how do you put this ant in alcohol, and how do you ship it back to England? And how do you label it? While you're sitting in the middle of the forest, how many of you have been in the rainforest? Yeah. Did it rain? Of course. It's wet, it's cold, it's not a happy place if you want to do some work. How do you collect a specimen? Think about this. You collect a new bird. You have to skin it, take out all the insides, and then you have to identify it, but then you have to protect it from the ants and the rats in your camp that want to eat your specimen. Then you have to pack it for shipping back to London. The logistics were pretty difficult. He loved beetles, and these are some of his beetles. And I'm just showing you this because I think they're really beautiful. I think the beetles are wonderful. wonderful things. You're nodding your head. Are you a beetle person? Wallace went to Sarawak. He was a guest of James Brooke, the first white Raja of Borneo. The butterfly on the screen is called the Raja Brooke birdwing butterfly, discovered by Wallace, which he named after James Brooke. And he loved shooting orangutans. Wallace shot 17 because orangutans were very good money. He was a commercial person. He had to make money. One day, he shot an adult female in a tree. The orangutan fell to the ground, plop, and then he heard, and she was holding a baby. And then Wallace turned from a collector into a surrogate father. And he said, oh, it's so cute, and I have to look after this animal, and he protected it, and he tried to give it milk, and he really loved this animal. He spends about 3 pages in this book talking about what a wonderful, cute little baby he had. And then the orangutan died. And what did he do? He skinned it, he cleaned the bones, and he sold the skeleton to a museum in England for £100. A lot of money at that time. Wallace was very interested not only in wildlife and nature, he was very interested in people. And again, in this book, he spends a lot of time talking about different races of people, different customs, different cultures. Where are they similar? Where are they different? He was very, let's say, enlightened for a colonial visitor of the time. This is an interesting statement that he wrote, that we in Europe have advanced in many things, but we have not really advanced in terms of moral degree. Wallace wrote that if he went to any village in Indonesia, there was no crime. You left your door open. The kids are running back and forth. You know, you see it all the time. If there's a problem, the Kepala Kampung gets together and says, okay, what's the problem? It's your fault. 5 chickens finished. You know, things worked out well. People got along with each other. And it wasn't like that in the UK. And Wallace was very surprised and pleased to see that. He loved Borobudur. And he said it took more skill to make Borobudur than to make the pyramids. Big statement. He came to Sulawesi 3 times. Twice to the south, near Makassar, once up north to Manado. This is what we can talk about later on, plans for recognizing Wallace in Indonesia and specifically in the Makassar region. And this was important for him. He loved Makassar. He said it was the prettiest and cleanest town he had ever been in Asia. Wow. Wow. What a great thing to say. He went to Maros. and he loved Maros. I've rarely enjoyed myself more than his time in Maros. And we just learned that Maros has been designated a UNESCO geopark. Congratulations to Maros. Congratulations to South Sulawesi. And let's work on that. Let's use that. Let's build on that international recognition to put it together with conservation. In Bantimorong, he found this butterfly. I trembled with excitement as I took it out of my net. So this, he called it Ornithoptera remus. Now it's called Troides hippolytus, a beautiful butterfly. And he was very impressed by the butterflies of that area. You just heard about the Wallace line. And the Wallace line is really important. How did it happen that he discovered this area? If you look at the line, it goes through the word Makassar. You see it? Wallace was in Bali. And then he took a boat to Lombok. And it's not far. But Wallace said, Bali is so different from Lombok in natural history that I don't understand why. And it comes down to geology. A lot of it comes down to geology, doesn't it? Where on the west, you have shallow sea levels that 10,000 years ago, the sea dried up and animals and people could walk from one island to another, from Sumatra to peninsular Malaysia to Java to Borneo. On the west, also shallow sea levels. You can walk from Aru to Australia 10,000 years ago. In the middle, you see that line is a big, deep ocean trench. And that never dried up. So in the West, you have primates, elephants, tigers, hornbills. In the East, you have marsupials, cockatoos, cendrawassi, and so on. In the middle, where we are now, it's a transition zone called Wallacea, and it's a very strange zone for biology because you have Babirusa, Anoa, and so on. He was also interested in how people moved from island to island, and he was asking the same question for people. Why are the people of the West primarily Malay? And why are people in the East primarily Papuan? Of course, people move around a lot more easily than animals do. So it's very difficult to find a distinction, right? But he was asking that question in 1850. He was interested in languages. He collected vocabularies for 57 local languages. So he was an interesting guy. He would sit around, there wasn't much else to do. He would sit around the campfire at night in a village. And he had a vocabulary list, and he said, okay, what's your word for makan, matahari, kuning, pergi, jalan, whatever. And he would make lists of all of those books. This young man is called Ali. Have you ever heard of Ali? Yes, you have. No? Ali's one of my good friends. Ali was a 15-year-old boy from Sarawak, from Kuching. When Wallace was in Sarawak, he was Wallace's cook. Wallace said to Ali, come on, let's go on a hero's journey. Let's go explore Indonesia. I need you to be my cook. I need you to teach me Malay. And Wally did a crazy thing. He said yes. Again, think about it. A 15-year-old boy from the kampong, never been out of the kampong. This big, tall, white guy speaking funny Malay says, you come with me. You may never come back, but you come with me. It's a bit crazy, no? Alice became Wallace's camp manager. Right? Telephone, please. He became Wallace's camp manager, and he was responsible for all of the logistics. So Wallace could not have done what he did without having Ali's support. Now, where did Ali retire? I'm pretty sure Ali retired in Ternate. Because he writes, Wallace writes that he had a wife and family in Ternate. And some years later, an American naturalist met Ali in Ternate. Now, I'm looking for Ali's descendants in Ternate, because wouldn't it be nice if a man or a woman says, yes, Ali was my great-great-great-grandfather. I'm interested in conservation like Ali was. Let's do something. But up to now, I have not found them. Hello. So if any of you are in the Department of History and you're interested in a project and you want to spend a few months in Ternate, please talk to me. I'll give you the background information. I've even tried looking for Ali's descendants using mediums and dukuns and bomos and shamans. I've also tried to have press conferences. No luck. But if you have any ideas, talk to me. Now, most people have heard of Darwin. Not everybody has heard of Wallace. They had equal claim to the theory of natural selection. And if it happened today, they would be using lawyers. Wallace was always looking for the secrets of natural selection and evolution. And in Sarawak, he wrote something called the Sarawak Law. This law stated in 1855 that species did not come from the sky, that every new species came following a pre-existing species. And this was important. This was new. And you have to remember that the culture, the history in England in 1850s was very strong Christian, where God created everything. So this was shaking the system. And Darwin himself didn't like this because his wife, he was afraid of his wife. His wife was very strong Christian, and this was against the culture. In 1858, Wallace was in Halmahera, and he had a malarial dream. He dreamed about why there aren't more people in the world. It was due to the theories of Thomas Malthus. He went back to Ternate. He wrote his paper, 10-page paper. He could have sent it for publication. He didn't. Made a mistake. He sent it to Darwin. Darwin showed it to Lyell. And it's a long story, but this is what Wallace came up with, which is basically the theory of natural selection. He published before Darwin. He had the idea before Darwin, and basically Darwin Minchuri. Basically Darwin stole the idea and claimed first priority. Now, if you're in academics, as you say, get published and get published first. While Wallace was still in Indonesia, I think he was in Ceram, Darwin finished very quickly The Origin of Species. It shook up England. It was a big book. It was a big idea. And Darwin became famous. And Wallace stayed less famous. So again, we could have a whole seminar on the history of science. What did Darwin know and when? When Wallace died, he was recognized. One of the two most important figures of the 19th century. That's a huge compliment, isn't it? Read what he says, and here I'd like your opinion later on. Do you agree with this? Because we have mastered and conquered nature, we have had a growth in population. There's a huge accumulation of wealth. Also, there's an increase in poverty and crime. And that there's an imbalance, that evil has overtaken the good. Again, that's a very modern thing to say, isn't it? What do you think? Do you agree with this? For you students, this is a student, not yet in university, in high school, 17 years old, in Oxford. And she was on her hero's journey. She went through the old storerooms of the Oxford Natural History Museum and found 300 specimens of Wallace that had never been catalogued. So you don't have to be climbing a mountain. You could be doing it in the lab. You could be doing it in the library. Final question. I don't want to look back. I want to look forward. If Wallace came back today, what would he think? Would he say, oh, the nature is just as wonderful as when I was here 170 years ago? Would he say, we're in big trouble? Would he be active? Would he be an activist? Would he be a conservationist? Or would he be a businessman? Would he buy a Kalapa Sawit plantation? What do you think? I don't know. But my point is this. Let's use Wallace to look forward. Let's use Wallace for conservation and to say, here we have the legacy of an interesting man, but just a man. What can we learn from him, and what can we do to keep that legacy intact, to keep nature healthy, and to have a balance? We need a balance. We need development. Yeah? Everybody agrees. We need electricity. We need transportation. We need good schools. We need health care. You know, essential for the development of any country. But there has to be a balance. It has to be done carefully. So, Alfred Russel Wallace's 200th birthday is in January. We can celebrate that birthday the whole year. So happy birthday, Selamat Ulang Tahun, Alfred, and thank you very much for your time.
How many questions would you expect from the audiences? Any questions? Okay. So it's a wonderful presentation, presentasi yang sangat luar biasa yang menggambarkan perjalanan seorang Wallace in Southeast Asia. For your information, Paul, we have Professor Suryadi here. He's from Department of History. As you mentioned in your presentation, that anyone who is to look for more information about Ali internet, so you may want to talk to him later. Okay, all right. So, ladies and gentlemen, fellow participants, now we open for the question. Raise your hand if you wish to ask the questions. You can use Bahasa, and we try to help you translate it into English. Okay, all right. Anyone? Ada Eni dan Wawan? Please, you can speak Bahasa, and we try to help you. Ada juga Ibu Hera di sini nanti bisa membantu kita for the translation, because she is the head of Pusat Bahasa here. Please, berani, seperti dia bilang tadi, why boys left home gitu. Harus punya keberanian meskipun no support, okay, but you have a brave to explore anything that you want to know. Silakan, come on. Okay, one. Okay, another. Ada di belakang, kalau ada angkat tangan. Okay, for the moment we have one person to ask. Okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Yang saya hormati Bapak Paul, Pak WR4 dan teman-teman yang saya cintai. So I have a question, Mr. Paul. Firstly, I would like to say that I really love the presentations. I'm not gonna lie, this is the first time I learn in depth in terms of the life of Alfred. So I'm really interested on how someone from other 800 centuries interested in Indonesia, right? He spent most of his life live in Indonesia and learning and interested toward all the culture and stuff, and that's amazing. That's really amazing. The reason of that is because that type of energy, I never see that type of energy around my place, for example, for someone that's so passionate to see and deep inside of a culture of a countries, right? So my question is like, what is the driving force of someone like Alfred? What make him so energetic to get that type of energy? Because the problems that I see in youth right now, we are lacking of energy. We doesn't have energy like that. So the question is where that energy come from? Thank you so much.
Should we welcome another question? Or would you like to answer? Okay. Ada lagi satu yang bertanya, teman-teman sekalian? Pak Suryadi mungkin ada yang mau ditanyakan, Pak? Oke. Alright, so mungkin langsung akan dijawab ya. So the question, what makes him so
interesting? Thank you. That's one of the most interesting questions I've had. I don't know, what do you think? You all have energy. I mean, you go to university, that's not easy. You're all trying to each of us has to figure out what we're doing in life. We have to figure out, do we have a purpose? We have to figure out how to behave. Each of us makes mistakes. Yeah? Energy is I think energy can be curiosity. And you have that in your studies, don't you? What is going on here? What's happening? What are the dynamics? What are the relationships? And questioning. If somebody says something to you or you see it on social media, ask, is this true? Why is this person saying something? If it's written in a book, is it true? Maybe. Maybe not. If a professor says something, is it true? Maybe. I hope so. But I think energy comes from your heart and your head together to say, I want to know something. I want to explore. And you can explore ideas, you can explore geography, you can explore physically, you can explore relationships, you can explore creativity. If you paint a picture, that's a journey. That's an energy also. It's a way of trying to make sense of the world.
Thank you. Ya, saya surplus lagi. Beliau mengatakan tadi bahwa energi itu bisa datang dari hati Anda dan kepala Anda. Oke, itulah yang membuat Anda sama dengan situasi perkuliahan Anda. Oke, curiosity. Jadi ada rasa keingintahuan yang tinggi. Apabila profesor Anda mengatakan sesuatu, Anda menanyakannya itu, mempertanyakan, is that true or not? Gitu. Jadi energinya datang dari dua aspek itu. Alright. So another question, silakan. Please.
Yeah, how did Alfred now Indonesia during the 1800s? How did Alfred now got Indonesia in that 1800s?
Well, in the mid-19th century, the Dutch, of course, were in Indonesia. And the Dutch and the British were always fighting, right? The big fights they had in Bandanera, for example. There was a period, remember in 1812, when the Dutch let England take over the colonies. And they did some really nasty things in Java. So, yeah, the people in England knew about Indonesia, and in science, they knew a bit about because the Dutch also were doing science. They were writing books. But for Wallace, as I said, Indonesia was a place of great richness in natural history. And he knew he could make some money here because of the orangutans and the cendrawasih and the butterflies and the beetles. He knew there were plenty of butterflies and plenty of beetles. So he thought, should I go to Africa? Should I go back to South America? Should I go to Northern Asia, to China and Japan? Well, Indonesia had nature, and in a way it was easier because the Dutch already had established communications and towns, and logistics would be easier for him to travel and to send back mail and specimens.
Thank you. Kalau pertanyaannya tadi bagaimana mungkin seorang Alfred di tahun 1800-an sudah mengenal Indonesia, ya pada saat itu kan ada pendudukan Belanda ya di sini, dan kita tahu tadi dia menyebut bahwa Belanda dan Inggris itu selalu berperang untuk kepentingannya, dan ujung-ujungnya acuannya karena dengan butterfly yang ada, dengan segala aspek yang ada di sini ternyata memunculkan bisnis yang terjadi di situ yang dapat menghasilkan uang. Saya buka lagi, I open again for the next question. Berani ki bertanya. One. Thank you. You may speak Bahasa or English directly. introduce yourself. Okay, the first questions comes from our student volunteer named Fitra from International Relations Department. Tolong perkenalkan dirinya juga supaya beliau tahu siapa yang bertanya dan dari prodi mana.
Selamat pagi, perkenalkan nama saya Anissa Musfira, saya dari Departemen Arkeologi. Saya ingin bertanya, di arkeologi itu tulisan-tulisan dari Wallace banyak dipergunakan untuk referensi, terus dia juga menjadi pengetahuan untuk arkeologi banyak. Pertanyaan saya itu, apakah tulisan-tulisan Wallace ini dia itu bertujuan untuk melindungi aset sejarah Indonesia atau dia hanya untuk bisnis saja? Terima kasih.
So she's from archaeology department, and she said that a lot of writings from Alfred become the reference for the study and knowledge in the department. And the main question is, do all those writing is for the sake of money or for the knowledge?
Both. You know, some people have a need to share their ideas and their information. And at that time, also Wallace could make money from writing books. But also if he was writing a book, his position in society was raised. And he wanted to be seen as a serious scientist. So he had an ego. There was an ego involved in this. And I think anytime you say, I want to write a book, that means you also have a strong self-confidence. Hargadiri. And that's okay. And I think he did it for the two reasons. He wanted to share his information, but he also wanted to, three reasons: share information, make some money, and raise his position in society. Remember, Wallace came from the lower middle class. Charles Darwin was from the upper class. It was a caste, almost a caste system. So Wallace had to try to raise his profile.
Jadi poinnya tadi dua-duanya. Oke, seperti disampaikan bahwa Wallace itu datangnya dari low middle class family. Jadi kelas bawah, kasihan dibandingkan dengan si Darwin. That's why dia juga mau mengangkat harga diri dan martabat keluarganya. Jadi for the sake of money and knowledge. Oke, untuk itu. Baik, oke, silakan ada lagi. We go first and then we go to you, Abi. Alright? Okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkenalkan, nama saya Nur Ismi dari Departemen Ilmu Sejarah. Pertanyaan saya kan, buku Alfred ini merupakan salah satu sumber saya dalam menulis skripsi. Saya menulis tentang perahu Padewakang, dan dalam bukunya itu beliau menuliskan beberapa catatan mengenai perjalanannya menggunakan perahu. Dan pertanyaan saya, bagaimana Alfred ini menulis semua perjalanannya, kemudian apa yang didapatkan di Indonesia sehingga menjadi satu buku. Karena kenapa saya bertanya demikian? Karena dalam sejarah itu kita harus memverifikasi sumber yang didapatkan. Jadi apakah bagaimana caranya Alfred ini menulis semua yang didapatkan Indonesia sehingga menjadi satu buku yang Kepulauan Nusantara, kalau tidak salah bahasa Indonesianya. Itu, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
She is from the Department of History, and she's now writing for his last thesis, skripsi, and she is questioning about how could Alfred wrote those journey regarding the boat of in Sulawesi, because when we write something, we need a lot of clarification from many sources. And how could he do that? How could he write all those journey and in some point that we need a lot of clarifications from many sources in order to be able to write those journey? Hope you got the point.
I'm not sure I'll try to answer. This is his travel story, and he had no reference books. He had no Lonely Planet. You know, he had no Wikipedia. So he carried with him a few books about taxonomy and biology, but they were old books written by some Dutch scientists, and it was all in his head. It was all what he saw and what he got talking to people. And that's interesting for research. It's good to do your library work, but sometimes you also have to get information from other experts or from local people, because that can be important also. And they might have a story that you had not heard before. It may not be true, but you might have another perspective. So don't only go to the library, don't only go to Wikipedia. If you have a question about an expert, write to the person, write to him or her, and say, I'm a student. I see you wrote about so-and-so. I'm doing a report about so-and-so. They will answer you. So don't be lazy. Yeah? Expand your universe.
Tadi poinnya bahwa ada 2 buku si Alfred bawa ini dalam melengkapi tulisan-tulisan perjalanannya, tapi dari pikirannya juga. Nah, sebagai seorang mahasiswa dia bilang tadi tipsnya, apalagi Anda melakukan riset, jangan terlalu percaya sama library. Ketemu banyak orang, kalau misalnya Anda mau bertanya kepada ahlinya, tanya sama ahlinya apabila Anda ingin mengetahui lebih banyak hal. Oke? Jadi dia punya 2 buku tadi, saya tidak tahu. There are 2 books he got when he was doing his travel, right? The Alfred. You mentioned 2 books, if I'm not mistaken. You mentioned 2 books brought by Alfred during his journey. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Abi, speak Bahasa or English? In English. Okay.
Easier. Hello. My name is Abigail. I was a student and now I'm a lecturer here in Universitas Hasanuddin. My field is actually very biodiversity, but mainly aquatic biodiversity. But what I would really like to know is, you said that Alfred Wallace left school at 13, right? And then he went out and he did all these amazing things and so on. Actually, it's 2 questions which are related. Firstly, what do you think he would have actually known at the time he left school? Yeah, what sort of level would he have been? And secondly, how did he, okay, you've already given us the why, the drive, the thing, but how did he actually gain all the basic knowledge he needed to become what he did?
Jadi pertanyaan Abi ada 2, bahwa dia Alfred meninggalkan sekolah di umur 13 tahun. Kira-kira pengetahuan apa yang pada saat itu dia tahu sehingga dia harus tinggalkan sekolah gitu, ya kan? Pertanyaan kedua, Oke. Pertanyaan kedua tadi? Okay. It's clear now. Okay, please.
I find it also hard to imagine that he had a basic education in a normal school in England, which would not prepare him for the trip that he had. I'm sure he learned maybe a bit of Latin, a bit of mathematics, a bit of science. I think the only explanation is that he was a genius, and that he was an autodidact, and that he studied himself. And but he never had the benefit of a college education. Darwin, of course, went to Cambridge. He was just an exceptional man. Well, he spent a lot of time in libraries. He did, yes. Remember libraries? Yes, remember books? He spent a lot of time in libraries, and he wasn't afraid to talk to people and ask. Because, for example, before he went to Indonesia, he spent a lot of time in the Natural History Museum in London. And he talked to the curators and said, what's this, and why is this different? And what books can you recommend to me? And who else are the experts? He consulted, he talked to people. Yes, exactly. He did his own PhD program. But not university. But maybe he knew more than many PhDs.
Ya, menarik sekali teman-teman sekalian bahwa dia Alfred orangnya memang jenius, oke, dan selalu mau tahu dan banyak bertanya, banyak berkonsultasi dengan orang. Apa yang dia mau ketahui dia bertanya. So mungkin dia lebih PhD dari PhD yang ada sekarang kalau kita mau ukuran yang sekarang ya. Oke, nah teman-teman ini menjadi suatu contoh bahwa ask, consult with people who knows untuk kita dapatkan pengetahuan. Okay, do we need more? It's okay. Okay, so why don't we give applaud for our speaker today? Oh, one bit. Okay, this is the last questions, right? Okay, silakan. Ada mic-nya? Okay. Nama dan dari prodi mana biar beliau bisa connect dengan prodi Anda.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Perkenalkan, saya Ahmad Widat, pertukaran mahasiswa dari Universitas Sumatera Utara, program studi sastra Arab. Baik, terima kasih atas kesempatannya. Yang ingin saya tanyakan adalah, kita tahu bahwasanya seorang, saya lupa tadi namanya. Seorang Alfred Russel, Wallace adalah seorang penjelajah dan juga banyak prestasinya begitu. Dan juga bagaimana ia mendedikasikan dirinya untuk datang ke Indonesia untuk melakukan sebuah penelitian begitu. Lalu poin yang ingin saya klik adalah tentang semangat dan tekad beliau begitu. Nah, yang ingin saya tanyakan kepada Bapak Paul adalah bagaimana harapan Bapak sendiri terhadap kami anak muda Indonesia, bagaimana menghadirkan sebuah kepekaan sosial begitu. Mengingat di zaman sekarang anak muda itu tidak peduli dengan hal-hal sekitarnya begitu. Pertanyaannya adalah bagaimana harapan Bapak Paul sendiri kepada kami untuk anak Indonesia sendiri, bagaimana untuk membangun Indonesia 2045 sebagai generasi emas. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
I jump into the question directly. What do you think your hope toward the Indonesian young man in relating to the spirit of Alfred?
I hope for several things. I hope that you will go on your own hero's journey and explore ideas. I hope you will explore your own mind And I hope you will have developed your sense of, how to say this, your sense of fighting for what you believe in. You know, societies change. If you look at the societies in Indonesia and around the world, well, 200 years ago, look at the role of women. Women couldn't vote. They couldn't get an education. They can now. It wasn't always like that. Look at how views about slavery have changed. Now slavery around the world is not on. You look at things like child labor around the world, that's not good. You look at basic human rights. You have a right to clean water, clean air. You have a right to free speech. Look at Indonesia, how Indonesia's society has changed since the 1970s, 80s rather. At that time, Indonesia was not an open country. And now Indonesia is the most democratic country in Southeast Asia. It has the best elections. It has the best media, most open media. Use that. You are voters. You pay taxes. You might run for public office. You might become teachers. You might have children. How do you use that power that you now have to make a change? If there's something wrong, my hope is that people will not diam-diam, will not just be quiet, but will act in some way. You have to decide what way that is. But I do hope that we will look for that kind of balance that Wallace was talking about. The balance between good and evil. The balance between development and nature. Why we need nature to achieve development. How we look at values in our life. And how we keep those values authentic.
Mudah-mudahan saya bisa menangkap, tapi yang jelas di poinnya tadi sense of fighting-nya, semangat juangnya yang kita harus miliki. Kita harus perhatikan apa yang terjadi di seluruh dunia. Mulai dia bilang peran perempuan yang masih banyak belum mendapatkan akses ke pendidikan, terus kemudian perbudakan juga masih ada, perhatikan semua itu. Lalu ada child labor, pekerja anak yang masih di bawah umur tapi harus bekerja. Kemudian ada di masyarakat Indonesia kita yang sudah mulai berubah, nah itu tolong diperhatikan dan jangan hanya diam saja apabila ada sesuatu yang menurut Anda salah. Jadi semangatnya harus dibangun untuk perjuangan melihat ketidakadilan, ketidakseimbangan tadi, balance ya. Yang ada. Sudah ikut balance kan sama Ibu Ira? Ada Ibu Ira loh di sini yang pokjanya balance. Alright, so that's all the last question. And once again, why don't we give a big applause for our great speaker this morning. Next agenda, we're gonna have a photo session first and then 7 presentations. I would like to invite Bapak Paul to stand up here and our Vice Rector for partnership. The souvenir was given by the head of international office to the vice rector, and then, tumbler. Yeah, on the desk or on your. Okay. Oke. Ya, kita kasih aplaus dulu untuk thank you very much. Fellow participant, for your information, bagi Bapak Ibu, dosen atau mahasiswa yang mau outbound ke luar negeri, entah itu Anda short visit atau presenting di international conference, our Office of International itu menyediakan souvenir ini for free for you. Oke, siapa tahu nanti ada yang mau outbound ke luar negeri, ikut sama dosennya presenting. Oke, ikut di seminar apa? Oke, Bapak Ibu dosen silakan menghadap ke kantor International Office di lantai 6 Rektorat, and we will provide souvenir for you to bring. This is an effort, ini usaha kita untuk Unhas to become internationally acknowledged and internationally well known. Oke, ke depannya. Oke, thank you very much. Oke. Now the last part of our agenda is the photo session. Kebetulan kita punya fotografer sekaligus kabak humas.